What's up, guys? Scott here from Chernobyl Studios, and as the title suggests, I am going to explain to you what compression actually is. So let's jump right into it. So, what is compression? Like, for real, what is it? So, it's actually not compression. So, if you think about compression, like you put your hands together and you push something together, you compress it, right? So, you're thinking, okay, yeah, compress. But the problem with this being called compression is you're thinking about it completely incorrectly because you're not actually compressing anything with the musical or source signal. So, you're not like compressing it down. Compression is basically a volume fader. So imagine a track of volume automation, right, that you've been drawing in by hand. A compressor is the exact same thing. Okay? So volume fader, automatic volume fader, compression just takes things that are loud and then makes them quiet. That is it. All right? So as you dial in settings, you can control how much, when, and how long it would take a volume source to be affected. So instead of compression, just think of compressor as configurable volume fader. So imagine that you're sitting there like on a board of the olden days, and every time you want that signal to come down, you just move the volume fader down really really fast. Then you push it back up. That is what compression does. It's a configurable volume fader. Once you understand that, once you start thinking of it like that, the controls on an actual compressor plugin will start to make more sense because it's almost like the controls were named with the opposite effect of what they do. So let's move on. So compressing, oh my goodness, English language, compressor controls. So here is a solid state logic G bus compressor that I use pretty much in all my mixes for glue. I'm using it just because the buttons are very large and it's easy to see them. So, threshold right here, okay? This setting indicates when the plugin should start decreasing volume. For example, if you set your threshold to 10 dB, anytime the signal wants to go above 10 dB, your compressor will kick in. If you have a volume source that never goes above 10 dB, your compressor is literally doing nothing. It's doing nothing. So like I say, I set this to, 10, 15, whatever. A volume source has to go above my setting before the compressor will start to do anything. So in this case, it would be when the plugin should start decreasing volume. So with the ratio down here, this setting tells our compressor how much that signal should be decreased in volume. So continuing, threshold, we have it at 10 dB. The level is going above 10 dB. Now we have the ratio telling the compressor how much it should decrease the volume. The basic rule of thumb here is the higher the ratio, the more volume that will be reduced. There are books and videos with mathematical calculations of what exactly is a 2 to 1, how much reduction you're going to get. I'm sorry, that does not tickle my fancy. I'm not at all interested. All I care about is higher ratio equals more volume reduction. That's it. And then I dial it in based on what I like the sound of most. So as we're going on here, threshold is when the plugin should start decreasing volume. Ratio is how much the volume should be decreased by. And then attack, right? This setting tells the compressor how long it should take for it to completely decrease the volume by 100% as you have marked by the ratio. So it's almost like the opposite. Like the attack is you're telling the compressor how long it should take for it to do the full amount of volume reduction. So you're not like attacking anything actually. You're just basically telling the compressor, okay, you have a threshold at minus 10 dB, ratio of 4 to 1 with an attack of 1, right? So 1 millisecond. That means that anytime anytime the volume would go above the threshold of 10, it should take 1 millisecond for the volume to be reduced by a 4 to 1 ratio. That's it. That's all you're telling the compressor to do. So like I said, it's just an automatic volume fader that you're adjusting, right, with the compressor. Moving on to release, which is this one right here. This is about how long it would take or should take the compressor to go back to not doing anything should the volume source not go above 10 anymore. Okay, so when you're setting the compressor, this is like the setting that says, all right, fine, great. So we have a source that went over 10 dB. We want it to go down in a ratio of 4:1, and it should take 1 millisecond. And once that source stops going above 10 dB, the compressor should release back to zero, either in auto mode or zero point 0.1 millisecond or 1.2 milliseconds. It should go back to doing nothing. All right. If you have a source that is continually over 10 dB, it'll just continue, the compressor will just keep working and the actual release will never complete. Finally, we have makeup right here. This is where we could get the perceived volume back of the source signal once the compressor is doing its job. Because what will happen is when you set the threshold and everything like that, the volume will basically decrease. And then you could use the makeup gain to get it back to where it was, by ear perceived before the compressor started doing its work. One last thing I did want to mention here is typically every compressor is going to have a box like this that'll show the amount of compression being done or gain reduction. Okay, so when the compressor starts working, it simply means that I am doing 4 dB of gain reduction, 8 dB of gain reduction, so on and so forth. So this word compression, and now you're starting to understand compressor, you're literally not compressing anything. All you're doing is you're using the controls to automatically tell this plugin to pull the fader volume down and what to do if the source material goes above 10 dB, how much to pull it down, how much to pull it down, how long it should take, and once the source material stops going over 10, how long the compressor should reset back to 0. That's it. Now, the next question is going to be, well, that's fine and dandy, Scott, but I also understand I can't hear it. We're going to talk about that. Here's a very simple thing you can do. We're going to do it. I'm not going to do it with this compressor. I'll do it with a different compressor. But all you basically need to do so you can start hearing how compressors work would be to do it on drums. The reason why you want to do it on drums because they have a very, very fast transient, and it's very obvious when you're doing compression on drums because they have transient, they have a tail, they have a tone. They have those 3 things where compressors are actually used to manipulate and change source signal. So what we will do here, I'm going to explain it to you here. Then we'll go open Reaper and I'll do it for you live. So extreme drum example. We're loading a drum loop or program a really simple drum loop and then loop it, right? You're going to set the compressor to 10:1 with the threshold all the way down. This is just so you can set the compressor later and we'll go on. So you set the attack and release to the fastest possible settings, and then you start to play with the attack release settings and you start to listen. So let's go ahead and do that right now, actually. All right, here we are inside Reaper. I have programmed just a very simple drum beat. Let's go ahead and play it. That's it. It's just a very simple drum beat, so we can start to hear what the compressor will do. This is the Waves C1 Comp compressor, a very bare bones, simple compressor, no crazy controls, nothing at all, just so you can get an idea of what will happen. So like I said, the first thing we need to do is set the ratio basically to a 10:1. This automatically sends it to like 10 to 3:1. It doesn't matter. Then we want to set the attack and release basically to the fastest possible, like that. Okay. Now what's going to happen when I press play here is I'm going to press play and then I'm going to jack the threshold, which is this thing right here, or this button right here. I'm going to bring it all the way down. Basically, it's going to mute my drums, and then I'll bring it back up to where we have about 10 or 12 dB of gain reduction. So here we go. So like I say, you hear nothing because we're completely compressing. The drums gone. And I'll slowly bring it back up. You're going to hear that basically it sounds destroyed, but that's okay. For you to hear compression, We're not trying to do anything musical. We're just trying to get you to understand what compression does. So already, just by setting this, we can see that we're crushing the drums. We're completely cutting off the tail end of the snare drum. We have a massive attack, but it's almost like subdued because the volume is getting crushed so much. So this is a really good way for us to understand what the tone and sound of our drum is going to sound like when we play with the attack and the release. All right? So let's do that right now. We're going to keep the threshold the same, and we're going to mess with the attack right now. So, and then with this plugin, you can really get extreme attack times. So it's going to be very obvious. Let's go. So what are you noticing when I adjust the attack? When it's on the fastest possible attack, what's happening? And when it's on the slowest possible attack, what's happening here? Right? Okay, so basically, more attack is going to equal more drum transient. So more of the drum is actually going to come through into the compressor, and you're going to have more of a tone and more of a sound. I'll show it to you again. It's literally a night and day difference. When the attack is on its absolute fastest, the transient and everything is literally getting crushed because it doesn't have time to come through fully until the compressor starts reducing volume, right? So that's why we would adjust the attack to such a degree where there's plenty of time for the transient to come through so we can shape the tone to how we want it. Now I can already start to understand why we might want to use a compressor to shape a snare drum, for example. So let's go ahead, I'll shape it. I'll set it to where I think it basically sounds decent for this little drum loop. It's such a fast transient attack. Basically anything more than the fastest ever sounds better. So that's what it is. So more attack equals more drum transient. All right. So let's leave the attack where it is and let's play with the release. Pay attention to the snare drum. What is happening to the snare drum characteristically? Okay? Pay attention to, for example, the tone and to the drum tail, the sustain. Okay, if you answered that, all right, so the slower the release, the drum tails disappear. The room sound disappears. The sustain kind of disappears. You would be correct. So more release or slower release equals basically choking the drums a bit more, less drum tail, less drum room, less sustain. So is this starting to make sense now? So we have the ratio, attack, and release. So let's set the release to have it just enough of the sustain that we're looking for. I'm kind of digging it right here. Now, I want to say right off the bat that these numbers are not arbitrary. Don't just punch these numbers in when you are working on something else. This is what I would consider a slow drum beat. It has more time for the snare to open up. So I'm setting these based on the snare that's playing right now. If this was a blast beat, or if there were a lot of quick things happening, I would probably configure the compressor differently. All right. Now, finally, the last thing we need to mess with is the ratio. Now, remember, the ratio is just that the amount of volume that is being decreased when we go over our threshold. So let's do that right now. So what you want to be listening for here are the characteristics of the drum. Okay? What's happening? What is happening to the drums when you mess with the ratio? So when you have a very low ratio, you're not going to notice really what's happening with the compressor that much. But the higher the ratio with drums, okay, essentially the higher the ratio, the more aggressive it's going to sound. The more um, obvious, I should say, that's a good word, the more obvious the attack and release settings are going to be. And I think if, I'm going to play this again, very slowly go through the ratio, I'll increase it. You're going to hear you're going to hear it becoming much more obvious that okay, we're doing some compression here because the drums become much more punchy and much more aggressive. You can hear that the drums really start to have a much more aggressive and punchy sound right about the 4-to-1 ratio range. So at like 1, obviously we're not doing anything. And at 2, you can hear it just a little bit. But right about 4-to-1 is when it really starts to kick in. Night and day difference. You can really hear the thickness of the drum really starting to come out now. Awesome. Now, I do want to preface this that I'm using the Steven Slate 5 drum. So there's already a level of compression and processing into this drum plugin. And that's one thing in general I'd like to say when you're using samples is that you won't have to do nearly as much compression as you may have to do with a real drum set or a real instrument because it's raw, right? So these are pre-processed to a degree where I'm basically just doing that tiny little icing at the top compression setting. So if 4-to-1 is not working for your snare drum, if it's a real snare drum, don't be alarmed. Use your ears until you get it to the sound that you want to hear. So recapping, right? More attack means more drum transient, right? A slow release, okay? Drum tails disappear and the room sound disappears. Now, remember what I said, like the names and the numbers like go against themselves. Like you would think like, okay, this is a fast release and this is a slow release because the number's lower. No, this is the slowest release and this is the fastest. So it's almost like the opposite. It's like we're playing in opposite land. So the slower the release, okay, the drum tails and the drum sound, the room sound, the sort of the sustain and the ambience will tend to disappear. All right. And the attack, as we already mentioned, more drum transient. And then the higher the ratio, the more aggressive things will be sounding for you. And this is a pretty standard compressor, nothing amazing, nothing crazy. And other compressors, free compressors, stock compressors, other compressors work or should work in the same way. Finally, when might you use compression? Obviously, you would use compression on drums. Compression is a great way to shape the tonal aspects of drums, get them sounding much more aggressive, get them punchy, get them to cut through a mix. Now, you can also use compression when you're controlling crazy volume differences. Doesn't that make sense? A popular thing to do is crazy amounts of compression on vocals because vocals are very dynamic. And, I don't know if you've noticed, sometimes when a person records vocals, they might be very quiet or they might be very far away from the microphone. And when you're looking at the wave file, it's like really, really tiny. And then they'll do a big scream and the wave file just expands into this brick. Well, a compressor will smash all that and make everything even and it'll help the sound. Also, the byproduct of using an effector on vocals will become much more aggressive sounding. Why? High, high what? High ratios, exactly. So the higher ratio, more aggressive, more upfront. That's how it would work with vocals. Now, I use compression on guitars all the time, especially in metal guitars, because I want to remove these extra dynamics that I don't want. So I want the guitars, bam, right up in front of the mix. I want them loud, aggressive. So I will use compression and maybe a limiter a little bit to remove the final dynamic aspects of metal rhythm guitars. So these are just two ways where you would want to use compression. Obviously, you may want to use an overall bus compressor for mix, glue, so on and so forth. Going into the every little detail of how to use compression is beyond this particular video. So this is just, I wanted this to be just a little starter video so you could finally understand what a compressor actually is, what it does, what the knobs and the words on the compressor actually means, and how to hear what a compressor actually does. That does it for this video, guys. Thanks a lot for checking out the video. If it was helpful, please let me know in the comments saying like, thanks Scott, it was helpful, or like, Scott, you're retarded, I didn't understand a word of this, you suck. Just any comment to let me know if I helped you or not will help me. Please leave a like, subscribe, hit the bell notification for my YouTube channel. It goes a long way to help me out. Also, please hit me up on my Facebook page. If you have Facebook, I'm trying to get the overall likes of my Chernobyl Studios page up to 600 or more by the end of the month. It would be awesome if you guys could help me out with that. And finally, I do have an Instagram where I'm posting awesome photos just like this, and you can learn more about what I do when I'm not working on Chernobyl Studios and what life is like in Kiev, Ukraine. All right, that does it. I'm out of here. Have a good one.